What's up, folks? I'm Dan, and welcome to I've Been Meaning to Read That, the show where I read books out loud that I've been meaning to read. Let's go. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are having as great a day as I am, because it is a gosh darn good day to be a Buckeye. That's right. Normally, I am not into sports at all, like really at all. But as a graduate and alumni of the Ohio State University, you know that I am over the moon because of last night's national championship win over Notre Dame. It was an excellent game, made even better by the fact that today I was supposed to have a bunch of professional development meetings, but because of this crazy polar vortex cold front coming in, I didn't have to go at all. So I just got to stay up late watching the Buckeyes win, and there's some things that are better than that, but not many. All right, let's get back to Les Miserables. Chapter 6, The Guardian of His House. The house, as we have said, consisted of 2 floors with 3 rooms on each and an attic above them. Behind it was a 1/4 acre of garden. The 2 women occupied the top floor, and the bishop's quarters were below. The first of his 3 rooms, giving directly onto the street, served as the dining room. The second was his bedroom and study, and the third his oratory. One could leave the oratory only by way of the bedroom, and the only way out of the bedroom was through the dining room. At the far end of the oratory there was a screened alcove with a bed for the occasional guest. The bishop was accustomed to offer it to country cures whose personal or parish affairs brought them to Digne. The former hospital dispensary, a small building which had been added to the house, extending into the garden, had been converted into a kitchen and storeroom. The garden also contained a shed, formerly the hospital kitchen, where the bishop kept 2 cows. Half of whatever milk they gave was sent every morning to the hospital. "I pay my tithe," he said. His bedroom was large and difficult to heat in winter, and since logs were very dear in Digne, he had had the notion of sealing off a part of the cowshed with a blank partition. It was here that he passed the very cold evenings. He called it his winter salon. Like the dining room, the winter salon was sparsely furnished, containing only a square white wood table and 4 straw-seated chairs. The dining room contained, in addition, an old sideboard painted with pink distemper. A similar sideboard, suitably draped with white cloths and imitation lace, served in the oratory as an altar. Wealthy penitents and the devout ladies of Digne had more than once subscribed funds for providing the oratory with a handsome new altar. The bishop took the money and gave it to the poor. "The soul of an unfortunate who thanks God for consolation," he said. "That is the best of altars." There were 2 wicker prayer stools in the oratory, and an armchair in the bedroom, also of wicker. When the bishop received half a dozen or more persons at a time, the prefect, officers from the garrison, or students from the little seminary, chairs had to be fetched from the winter salon, and if necessary the armchair from the bedroom and the prayer stools from the oratory. In this way, seating for 11 visitors could be provided. Sometimes there were 12, and on these occasions the bishop solved the problem by standing in front of the fire in winter, or in summer proposing that they should walk in the garden. There was a chair in the screened alcove, but it had lost part of its straw seat and one of its legs, so that it had to be propped against the wall. Mademoiselle Baptistine had in her bedroom a capacious wooden easy-chair, which had once been gilt and upholstered in flowered silk, but since this had to be brought in through the window, on account of the narrowness of the stairs, it could not be used for general purposes. It had long been Mademoiselle Baptistine's ambition to acquire a drawing-room armchair with tapered mahogany legs and yellow velvet upholstery with rosettes, but this would have cost at least 500 francs, and in 5 years she had been able to save only 42 francs, 10 sous, so in the end she had finally given up the idea. Do we ever realize our fondest dreams? Nothing could have been more simple than the bishop's bedroom. A French window opposite the bed, giving onto the garden, a narrow iron bedstead with a canopy of green serge, and beyond it, behind a curtain, an array of toilet articles betraying the fastidious habits of the one-time man of fashion. 2 doors, one by the fireplace, leading to the oratory, and the other by the bookcase, leading to the dining room. The shelves of the big glass-fronted bookcase were filled. The fireplace, its wooden surround painted to resemble marble, was normally without a fire. It contained instead 2 ornamental fire dogs, a form of episcopal luxury, embellished with flower vases and foliations that had once been silver gilt. And above the mantelpiece, where ordinarily a mirror is placed, there hung a once-silvered copper crucifix against a square of threadbare black velvet in a wooden frame that had lost its gilding. By the French window was a large table with an inkstand and a confusion of papers and thick tomes, and besides the table was the wicker armchair. A prayer stool stood at the foot of the bed, borrowed from the oratory. 2 portraits in oval frames hung on the walls on either side of the bed. Small gilt inscriptions on the bare canvas surrounding the portraits indicated that they represented, respectively, the Abbé de Chaliot, Bishop of St. Claude, and the Abbé Tourteau, Vicar General of Agde and Abbot of Grand Champ, of the Cistercian order. The bishop had inherited these when he took over the room from the hospital patients, and had left them where they were. They were priests and, presumably, benefactors, 2 things entitling them to his regard. Otherwise, all he knew about them was that they had received their appointments on the same day in April 1785, the one to his bishopric and the other to his living. He had made the discovery when Madame Magloire had taken down the portraits to dust them, the details being inscribed in faded ink on a small square of paper, yellowed with time and attached with sealing wafers to the back of the portrait of the Abbé de Grand Champ. The French window was covered by an aged curtain of some coarse material, which had finally become so worn that Madame Magloire had been obliged to put a large patch in it to save the cost of buying a new one. The patch was in the form of a cross, a fact upon which the bishop often remarked with pleasure. All the rooms in the house, those on the ground floor as well as the upstairs room, were whitewashed like a barracks or hospital. However, during the latter years, as we shall presently see, Madame Magloire discovered wall paintings under the dismembered paper in Mademoiselle Baptistine's room. This was accounted for by the fact that before becoming a hospital, the house had been a place of assembly. The bedrooms had red-tiled floors, scrubbed every week, with straw mats besides the beds. For the rest, the house was maintained by the 2 women in a state of scrupulous cleanliness. This was the one luxury the bishop allowed. "It is taking nothing from the poor," he said. But we may confess that of his former possessions he still retained a set of 6 silver knives and forks and a large silver soup ladle, which rejoiced the heart of Madame Magloire when they lay splendidly gleaming on the white tablecloth. And since we are depicting the Bishop of D as he was, we must add that he more than once remarked, "I should find it hard to give up eating with silver." To this treasure must be added 2 massive silver candlesticks which he had inherited from a great aunt. They held wax candles and stood, as a rule, on the bishop's mantelpiece, but when there was a guest, Madame Magloire lit the candles and placed them on the dining table. In the bishop's room, at the head of the bed, was a small cupboard in which she locked the silver cutlery and ladle every night, but it must be added that the key was never removed. The garden, somewhat the worse for the rather ugly buildings we have mentioned, was laid out in 4 intersecting paths around a drainage trap, and a 5th path ran round it, flanking the white boundary wall. The paths enclosed 4 square plots bordered with box. Madame Magloire grew vegetables in 3 of these, and the bishop had planted flowers in the 4th. There were a few fruit trees. Madame Magloire once said teasingly to him, "Monseigneur, you believe in making use of everything, but this 4th plot is wasted. Salads are more useful than flowers." "You are wrong," replied the bishop. "The beautiful is as useful as the useful." Then, after a pause, he added, "More so, perhaps." The 4th plot, divided into 3 or 4 beds, occupied nearly as much of the bishop's time as did his books. He would spend an hour or 2 there whenever he could, weeding, hoeing, and planting. He was not as hard on insect pests as a good gardener would have liked him to be. But then he claimed no knowledge of botany, knew nothing of strains and genera, and took no sides in the disputes between learned botanists. He did not study plants, he merely loved flowers. He had great respect for men of learning, but even more respect for the ignorant, and without forfeiting either loyalty, he watered his beds every summer evening with a green watering can. No door in the house could be locked. The dining-room door, which gave directly onto the cathedral close, had originally been as heavily equipped with locks and bolts as the door of a prison. The bishop had had all these removed so that by day or night the door was only latched and anyone could enter at any time. This had at first caused the two women great concern. "Put bolts on your bedroom doors if you like," he said to them. They came, in the end, to share his simple faith, or at least to behave as though they did, although Madame Magloire had moments of misgiving. As for the bishop, his view of the matter is conveyed by 3 lines which he wrote in the margin of a Bible. "This is the distinction. The doctor's door must never be shut. The priest's door must always be open." There is another note which he wrote in the margin of a work entitled A Philosophy of Medical Science. "Am I not as much a doctor as they? I too have my patients, in the first place theirs, whom they call sick, and then my own, whom I call unfortunate." Elsewhere, Monseigneur Bienvenue wrote, "Do not ask the name of the person who seeks a bed for the night. He who is reluctant to give his name is the one who most needs shelter." It happened one day that an estimable curé, I do not recall whether he was curé of Coulebrou or of Pompéry, having probably been prompted by Madame Magloire, asked Monseigneur whether it was not perhaps a little injudicious on his part to leave his door unlocked at all hours, and in short, did he not fear lest some calamity might befall a house so unprotected? The bishop touched him gently on the shoulder and said, quoting the Psalms, "Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain." Then he changed the subject. It pleased him to say, "There is priest's courage just as there is the courage of a colonel of dragoons. But," he added, "ours must be quiet." Chapter 7. Cravat. Here an event falls naturally into place which cannot be omitted because of the especial light it throws on the character of the Bishop of D. After the breaking up of the robber band of Gaspard Bèze, which had infested the gorges of Ulliot, one of Bess's lieutenants, Cravat, escaped to the mountains. He hid for a time in the country of Nice with the few surviving members of the band, then moved to Piedmont and suddenly reappeared in France, in the region of Barcelonnette. He and his companions were first seen in Jauziers and then in Toulouse. He hid in the caves of the Joug de l'Aigle, and from there preyed upon hamlets and villages, moving down through the ravines of Ubaye and Ubayette. He even ventured as far as Embrun, where he broke into the cathedral one night and looted the sacristy. His maraudings alarmed the countryside. The gendarmerie pursued him, but he always escaped, sometimes by the use of force. He was an intrepid rogue. It was during this reign of terror that the bishop arrived in the district on a tour of the diocese. He was met at Chastelar by the mayor, who urged him to turn back. Cravat was in control of the hills as far as L'Arche and beyond. To go further would be dangerous, even with an escort, and it would mean risking the lives of 3 or 4 unfortunate gendarmes. "Just so," said the bishop. "I intend to go without an escort." "Monseigneur," cried the mayor, "you must not even think of it." "I think so much of it that I refuse absolutely to have any gendarme, and I shall be leaving in an hour." "Alone?" "Yes, alone." "Monseigneur, you cannot." "There is a humble commune in the mountains which I have not visited for 3 years," said the bishop. "The people are friends of mine, peaceable, honest shepherds, who own no more than 1 in 30 of the goats they pasture. They spin brightly colored woolen threads and play mountain airs on 6-hole pipes. They need someone to talk to them from time to time about God. What would they think of a bishop who was afraid? What would they think of me if I did not go?" "But the brigands, Monseigneur, if you should fall foul of them—" "Just so," said the bishop. "Since you mention it, I may meet the brigands. They, too, must be in need of someone to speak to them of God." "But they are like a pack of wolves." "And perhaps that is why Jesus has appointed me to be their shepherd. Who can account for the ways of providence?" "They'll rob you." "I own nothing." "They may kill you." "An old priest mumbling his incantations? Why should they?" "Merciful heaven, Monseigneur, if you should meet them—" "I shall ask them for alms for my poor." "Monseigneur, I beseech you not to go. You will be risking your life." "Is that really all, Monsieur le Maire?" said the bishop. "I was not put into this world to preserve my life, but to protect souls." There was nothing for it but to let him go. The tale of his obstinacy spread through the countryside, causing great alarm. He left, accompanied only by a small boy who volunteered to act as his guide, having refused to allow his sister and Madame Magloire to go with him. They went on mules, meeting no one, and the bishop arrived safely at the hamlet of his friends the shepherds. He stayed there a fortnight, preaching, ministering, teaching, and moralizing. Before leaving, he wished to have a ceremonial Te Deum sung, but when he discussed this with the curé, he encountered a difficulty. There was no suitable church apparel. All the village could offer was its shabby sacristy and a few old chasubles trimmed with false braid. "No matter," said the bishop. "Announce the Te Deum after the sermon. Something will turn up." Messengers were sent to the neighboring churches, but the sum of all the treasures of those humble parishes was not enough to clothe a single cathedral cantor in a fitting manner. And in this awkward situation a large chest arrived for the bishop, brought to the presbytery by 2 unknown horsemen who at once rode away. It was found to contain a cope of cloth of gold, a mitre ornamented with diamonds, an archbishop's cross, a magnificent crozier, and the rest of the pontifical raiment stolen a month previously from the cathedral at Embrun. There was also a sheet of paper bearing the words, "Cravat to Monseigneur Bienvenue." "I said something would turn up," commented the bishop, and he added, smiling, "To him who is content with a curé's surplice, God sends an archbishop's cope." "God, Monseigneur?" murmured the curé with a faint smile. "Or the devil?" The bishop looked sternly at him and answered, "God." When he returned to Chastelar, people lined the roadside to see him. Mademoiselle Baptistine and Madame Magloire were waiting him at the presbytery, and he said to his sister, "Was I not right? The poor priest went empty-handed to the poor people of the hills, and comes back with his hands full. I set out with nothing but my trust in God, and I have brought back the riches of a cathedral." And before they went to bed that night, he said, "We must never fear robbers or murderers. They are dangers from outside, small dangers. It is ourselves we have to fear. Prejudice is the real robber, and vice the real murderer. Why should we be troubled by a threat to our person or our pocket? What we have to be aware of is the threat to our souls." He added, turning to his sister, "A priest must never speak to protect himself against other men. Men do as God allows them to do. We may only pray to him when we feel ourselves to be in danger, and we must pray, not for ourselves but for our brother, lest through us he fall into sin." However, episodes such as this occurred only rarely. We report those of which we have knowledge, but, in general, he spent his life doing the same things at the same time, and a month of his year resembled an hour of his day. As to what became of the riches of Embrun Cathedral, it is matter on which we prefer not to be questioned. They were very handsome objects, very tempting, very suitable for stealing for the good of the poor. Besides, they had already been stolen. Half the business had been done, and it only remained to alter the course of the theft, just to redirect it a little way. We will not comment ourselves on the matter, but later a somewhat cryptic note was found among the bishop's papers which may have had some bearing on it. It ran, "The problem is to decide whether this should be returned to the cathedral or to the hospital." Chapter 8. A Philosopher in His Cups. The senator of whom mention has already been made was a determined man who had pursued his career with a single-mindedness that ignored such hindrances as conscience, good faith, justice, and duty, achieving his ends without ever deviating from the path of his own interests. He was a former public attorney, mellowed by success, a man without malice, prepared at any time to do what he could for his sons and sons-in-law, his relatives, and even his friends, having wisely elected to take the easy way through life and profit by every chance that offered. To do otherwise would have seemed to him absurd. He was intelligent and sufficiently well-educated to consider himself a disciple of Epicurus, although he probably owed more to such lesser writers as Pigot Lebrun. He laughed as readily and amiably as the eternal truths as to the eccentricities of our excellent bishop, sometimes in the presence of the bishop himself. It happened that on the occasion of some semi-official ceremony, the senator, the count, and Monsieur Muriel dined with the prefect. Over the dessert, the senator, somewhat flushed with wine, but still urbane, exclaimed, Let us talk, Monseigneur. It is hard for a senator and a bishop to look each other in the eye without winking. We are both oracles. I will confess to you that I have my own philosophy." "And rightly so," said the bishop. "A man's philosophy is the bed he lies on. Yours, Monsieur le Count, is a bed of purple." "But let us talk like plain men," said the Count. "Plain devils, if you would rather." "I will say at once that I do not regard writers such as the Marquis d'Argens, Pirot, Hobbes, and Monsieur Nagion as charlatans. I have a row of philosophers on my shelves in gilt-edged editions." "Like yourself, Monsieur le Count." The senator continued. "I detest Diderot. He's an ideologue, a demagogue, and a revolutionary who in his heart believes in God. He's more bigoted than Voltaire. Voltaire made fun of Needham's attempt to reconcile the theory of spontaneous generation with the concept of God the Creator, and Voltaire was wrong because Needham's eels prove that God is unnecessary. A drop of vinegar in a spoonful of dough replaces the fiat lux. Imagine the drop and the spoon to be that much larger, and you have the world. Man is the eel. So where does the Eternal Father come in? My dear Bishop, I find the Jehovah theory very tedious. It produces nothing but lean men with empty heads. I want none of the great all, which irritates me. I prefer the great nothing, which leaves me untroubled. Between ourselves, and talking candidly as though you were my confessor, I will declare to you that I am a man of plain sense. I am not in love with your Jesus, who went about preaching renunciation and self-sacrifice, a miser's advice to beggars. Renunciation for what reason? Sacrifice to what end? I have never heard of a wolf sacrificing itself for the good of another wolf. Let us stick to nature. We who are at the top should have a higher philosophy. What is the use of being at the head of affairs if you see no further than the end of the next man's nose? Let us live happily. Life is all we have. That man has any future life, above or below or anywhere else, is something that I flatly disbelieve. You urge upon me the need for sacrifice and a renunciation. I am to ponder my every action, rack my brains with the problems of good and evil, justice, injustice, face and nefas. Why? Because later I shall be called to account? And when? After my death? What fantasy! It will take a cunning judge to catch me after my death, a ghostly finger stirring a handful of dust. We must acknowledge the truth, we initiates who have peered under the skirts of Isis. There is neither good nor evil, but only growth. We must look for reality, discard all else, get to the bottom of things, mustn't we? We need to have a nose for truth, to burrow in the earth for it and seize hold of it. To do so is glorious. It is to grow strong and rejoice. I stand 4 square, my Lord Bishop. The immortality of man is a daydream, a soothing promise which you may believe if you choose. How pleasant to be Adam, to be pure spirit, an angel with blue wings on one's back. Was it not Tertullian who said that the blessed will travel from one star to another? Splendid. We are to be the grasshoppers of the firmament, and we are to see God. Well, what nonsense it all is. God is a grotesque humbug. I would not say that in print, mark you, but I will whisper it among friends over the wine. To renounce the things of this earth for paradise is to throw away the substance for the shadow. To be the dupe of the infinite, that doesn't suit me. I am nothing. I am Count Nothing, Senator. Did I exist before my birth? No. Shall I exist after my death? No. What am I but an organized handful of dust? What am I to do on earth? I have a choice. I can suffer or enjoy. Where will suffering end? In oblivion, and I shall have suffered. But where will enjoyment end? Also in oblivion, but I shall have enjoyed. I have made my choice. One can eat or be eaten, and I would sooner eat. It is better to be the teeth than the grass. That's the way I look at it. In the end, whatever you do, the grave is waiting. The Pantheon for some of us, the same limbo for us all. Finis. Total liquidation. The vanishing point. Death is dead, believe me. It makes me laugh, the idea that there may be someone waiting there with something to say to me. An old wives' tale. A boogeyman for the kids. Jehovah for grown men. Now, our tomorrow is only darkness. Beyond the tomb lie equal limbos, and it makes no difference whether you are Sardanapalus or Vincent de Paul. That's the truth of it. The only thing to do is live. Use yourself while you have yourself. I have my philosophy, Bishop, and my philosophers, but I do not let myself be fooled by make-believe. But that is not to say that there aren't some who need it. The poor, the underfed, the down-and-outs. We give them myths to feed on, fairy tales, the soul, immortality, paradise, the stars, and they swallow it. They butter their dried bread with it. The man who has nothing else has God. It's better than nothing, and I've no objection, but for myself, I stick to realism. God is for the masses. The bishop clapped his hands. An admirable discourse, he exclaimed. What a splendid thing that kind of materialism is. Not everyone can achieve it, but the man who has it can't be fooled. He isn't going to let himself be exiled like Cato, or stoned to death like Stephen, or burned alive like Joan of Arc. It is all the joys of irresponsibility, the feeling that he can encompass everything with an easy mind, places, sinecures, dignities, power however gained, profitable recantations, useful betrayals, comforting adjustments of conscience, and go to his grave having stomached them all. How pleasant for him. I am not rebuking you, Monsieur le Senator. I cannot refrain from congratulating you. As you say, you great men have your own philosophy, subtle, refined, accessible only to the rich, suited to all occasions, an admirable seasoning for the pleasures of life. It is a philosophy distilled from the depths by those who specialize in such matters. But you are a good-hearted man. You do not grudge the masses their belief in God, any more than you grudge them their goose stuffed with chestnuts, while you have your turkey and truffles. Chapter 9. A Sister's Account of Her Brother. To give an impression of the domestic life of the Bishop of D, and the way in which the two devoted women subordinated their actions, their thoughts, even their timorous feminine instincts to his habits and purposes, without his needing to express them in words, we cannot do better than transcribe a letter written by Mademoiselle Baptistine to the Vicomtesse de Boischevron, her lifelong friend. D, 16th of December, 18. My dear Madam, not a day passes without our speaking of you. It is a habit, but now I have an added reason. In dusting and scrubbing the walls and ceiling, Madame Magloire made a discovery, and today our two bedrooms, with their old whitewashed wallpaper, would do no discredit even to a chateau as splendid as your own. Madame Magloire stripped away the paper and found something underneath. My sitting room, in which there is no furniture, since we use it only for hanging up the washing, is 15 feet high and 18 feet square. The ceiling, which was at one time painted gold, has beams like yours, but these were covered with canvas when the house was used as a hospital. There is also wainscoting dating from our grandmother's time, but my bedroom is the one you should see. After stripping away 10 layers of paper, Madame Magloire came upon wall paintings, which, if they are not very good, are at least tolerable. There is a picture of Telemachus receiving knightly honors from Minerva, and another of him in some garden of which I forget the name, but it is where the Roman ladies passed a single night. I cannot describe it all. I have Roman lords and ladies, here an illegible word, with their retainers. Madame Magloire has scrubbed it all clean, and this summer she is going to repair the blemishes and revarnish it, so that my room will be a positive museum. She also found 2 old wooden consoles in the attic. To have them regilded would have cost 6 francs apiece, and it is better to give the money to the poor, but anyway, they are ugly, and I would far rather have a round mahogany table. I am as happy as ever. My brother is so good. He gives everything he has to the sick and needy. We never have enough. The winter is hard in these parts, and we have to do what we can for those in need. At least we are fairly well warmed and lighted, and that is a great comfort. My brother has his foibles. If he mentions them, it is to say that that is how a bishop should be. Would you believe it? Our door is never locked. Anyone who chooses can walk straight into my brother's room. He's afraid of nothing, even at night. That is his kind of courage, he says. He does not allow Madame Magloire and me to worry about him. He runs all kinds of risks, and we are not supposed even to notice. One has to learn to understand him. He goes out in the rain, tramps through the puddles, travels in winter. He is not afraid of darkness or unsafe roads or chance encounters. Last year, he went alone into a part of the country where there were robbers. He would not take us with him. He was away a fortnight, and we thought him dead, but he came back unharmed and said, "Let me show you how I have been robbed." And he opened a box containing all the jewels stolen from Embrun Cathedral, which the thieves had given him. I had gone with a few friends to meet him some miles along the road, and this time I could not help scolding him a little, although I did it only when the carriage was making a noise that no one else could hear. At one time I used to think, no danger will ever deter him. He's terrible. But I have grown used to it. I make signs to Madame Magloire not to vex him. He runs what risks he pleases. I bear Madame Magloire off and go to my room and pray for him and then go calmly to sleep, knowing that if anything should happen to him, it would be the end of me too, and I should go to God with my brother and my bishop. Madame Magloire found it harder than I to accustom herself to what she calls his rashness. But now she has accepted the situation, and we pray together and tremble together and go to sleep. If the devil walked into the house, no one would prevent him. And after all, in this house, what have we to fear? There is always someone with us who is stronger. The devil may visit us, but God lives here. And that is enough. My brother need no longer say a word to me. I understand him without words, and we trust in Providence. That is how it must be with a man so great in spirit. I asked him for the particulars you wanted concerning the family of Faux. As you are aware, he knows everything of this kind and remembers everything, for he is still a strong royalist. It seems that they are a very old Norman family from the region of Caen. There are records 500 years old of a Raoul de Faux, a Jean de Faux, and a Thomas de Faux, all gentlemen, of whom one was Seigneur de Rochefort. The last of the line was Guy Etienne Alexander, who was a colonel and held a command in the Breton light cavalry. His daughter, Marie-Louise, married Adrien Charles, the son of Duke Louis de Gramont, colonel of the French Guards and lieutenant general of the army. The name is spelt Faux, Folk, or Fauque. I trust, dear madam, that you will commend us to the prayers of your saintly relative, the cardinal. As for your dear Sylvanie, she was quite right not to waste the little time she spends with you in writing to me. It is enough for me to know that she is well and working as you would wish, and that she still loves me. I am happy to have news of her through you. My health is fairly good, although I grow thinner every day, and now my paper is running out. 1,000 affectionate thoughts. Baptistine. P.S. Your sister-in-law is still here with her young family. Your great-nephew is charming. Do you know that he will soon be 5? Yesterday he saw a horse wearing knee pads, and he asked, "What's the matter with its knees?" His small brother drags an old broom round their apartment, pretending it is a carriage, and shouting, "Hup!" It will be seen from this letter that the two women, with that especial feminine genius which understands a man better than he understands himself, had learned to adapt themselves to the bishop's mode of being. Beneath that air of gentle candor that never belied itself, the Bishop of D performed great and sometimes gallant actions without seeming to be conscious of the fact. The women shivered, but acquiesced. Madame Magloire might sometimes venture to remonstrate with him before the event, but never during or after it. Nothing, not so much as a gesture, was allowed to distract him while the action was in progress. At times, without his needing to say it, or even perhaps being fully aware of it, such was his simplicity, they perceived that he was wholly the bishop, and themselves no more than shadows in his house. They served him as the occasion required, and if the best obedience was to vanish from his sight, they did so. With the admirable delicacy of instinct, they knew that some forms of solicitude can be an encumbrance. And so, responsive to his nature, if not fully understanding his thought, they did not seek to protect him even when they believed him to be at risk. They entrusted him to God. As Baptistine said, her brother's end would be her own. Madame Magloire did not say it, but she knew it.
And cut. That's a wrap, folks. Thanks for listening to today's episode of I've Been Meaning to Read That, with me, your host, Dan. If you want to learn more about the show, you can follow us on Instagram at Meaning to Read and TikTok at I've Been Meaning. If you want to support the show to help keep it going, you can find me on Venmo at Dingus Donut, DINGUSDONUT. Supporters get a shout out on the show, and even more important, get to vote on the next book that we read. No matter what, I'll see you for our next episode. Until then, read those books you've been meaning to read, and have a lovely, lovely day.